Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. For those of you who don't know me, maybe people on Zoom, my name is Jonathan Larson. I'm the Director of Training and Education for the Department of Data Science. And today I'll be talking about, obviously, creating effective presentations. So first, I think it would be useful for me to talk about the scope. So I'm going to focus on sort of one-off presentations. So something that you might do like at a conference or at a meeting or something, but not like a semester of lectures. I'm also going to assume that your presentation time is limited, so maybe an hour or less. So not like a full day workshop. I think a lot of the stuff that I present will be applicable to these other scenarios, but I'm going to focus on if you have limited time and you're just giving like one presentation. All right, so we are going to start with a think, pair, share. If you've never done this before, I'll explain it. I'm going to pose a question or a problem. I'm going to give you some time, not much time, to think about it on your own. So just don't shout out your answer quite yet. Then I'll give you a chance to pair up. If you're online, we're not going to put you in breakout rooms right now. So you'll do the think and the share portion, not the pair part. But if you're in the room, just turn to a neighbor and discuss. And then finally, after you've had some time to discuss, I'll ask if anyone is willing to share. All right, so here is the prompt. I want you to think about an upcoming presentation you're giving. If you don't have an upcoming presentation, that's fine. Maybe just think about some presentation in the past. And the question is, what are your goals? So what objectives are you trying to achieve? So I'll give you just a couple seconds to think about that on your own before we do the pair part. That wasn't a ton of time, but turn to a neighbor, form groups of 2 or 3, and discuss. What are your goals? All right. Thank you all for participating in that. So now that you've paired, we're going to do the share portion. So anyone in the room or online, if you want to share a goal for either a future presentation or a past presentation, there's no right answer. I'm not fishing for anything. Just I'm genuinely curious. What are your goals?
Upcoming presentation in a month is I'm going to be presenting like some research I've done or like a research symposium. It's not exactly like presenting in like a typical presentation. It's more like a poster session, so everyone will be like walking around. So I'll have like 3 to 5 minutes to try to sort of pitch the research I've been doing to like a more general audience. So my goal is just to be able to effectively do that with like time I've been given.
Great. Yeah, this is what I've seen a lot here is that time tends to be limited for these kind of presentations. So you want to be immediately intelligible. So the more that you can do to make sure that people understand what you're saying right away is going to be sort of like of primary importance. And we'll talk about how to achieve that. Anyone else? Oh, we have someone in the chat. Sharon? Oh, okay. Anyone else want to share a goal or two? Great.
So last presentation it was actually in statistics and bio folks. One of my goals was
great. Yeah. I don't have a ton of advice.
Well, I'll go further and say that I was entertaining with the hope that entertaining leads the path to ingestion of knowledge.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you don't want people to be falling asleep for sure. We will talk a little bit about how to keep people engaged, just a little bit, but that's definitely an admirable goal to, try and entertain people a little. Okay, so not knowing what you were going to say, I made a list of some possible goals. So just to go through some of those, you might want people to understand what you're saying. You might want people to remember what you said. You might want to convince people of something, so like make some kind of an argument, teach people a new skill, change people's behavior. That's a tricky one. You might want people to like you or to think that you're competent, even if that's not an explicit goal. It might be something sort of underlying what you're doing when you're presenting. You might want people to pay attention. You might not want to spend a ton of time on prep. I want to acknowledge that not everyone has a bunch of time to use to prepare for presentations. So that's just a reality of this kind of thing. And then finally, I want people to be able to apply what I say to new situations. So these are just some possible goals. Like I said, there's no right answer for whatever presentation you're going to give in the future. But for today, we are mainly going to be focusing on this last one, wanting people to be able to apply what you say to new situations. Part of the reason for that is that that's that was the outcome that was used in the research that I'm mainly going to be talking about, where the researchers were testing if the viewers of the presentation could then use that information in like new scenarios that they had never seen before. So I know that that's a pretty specific goal, but my hope is that if the people who see your presentation can do this, they probably also understood what you said. They probably were also paying attention. So this is maybe like a higher order overarching goal. So let's talk a little bit about that research. So I promised in the abstract for this presentation that I would be focusing on research-based methods. So we are mainly going to be focusing on research by this guy, Richard E. Mayer. I think that he is now retired, but he spent most of his career at UC Santa Barbara. He is a psychologist, maybe an educational psychologist more specifically. And he spent his career trying to figure out what works and what does not work when it comes to specifically multimedia learning. And when he was talking about multimedia learning, he was focusing on specifically images and words. So images, whether those are static or animated or video, and then words, whether those are printed or spoken. There might be some of you who are saying, well, what about other things like kinesthetic learning? We will talk very briefly about that, but he focused on words and images. And the reason that I'm going to focus on his work is because over the course of his career, he and his lab conducted over 200 true experiments in the sense of they were true randomized controlled trials where participants were randomized to either treatment or control to determine what does and does not work when it comes to multimedia learning. So this is a good, high quality evidence base. This is not just observational. We're going out into classrooms and we're just like watching people teach. We're actually randomizing people to different conditions and then comparing those conditions. And like I said earlier, their outcome was always what's called transfer learning. So can you transfer what you learned to a new situation? All right, so we're going to be focusing on these research-based principles. By the way, this book is over 400 pages long. There's 15 principles. We're not going to cover all of them. We will get through about a dozen. I know that's a lot. Some of them might be kind of common sense. And so anyway, so before we get into the research, I think that, like I said, some of these might be kind of common sense. And so you might know them already. So I'm going to give a little example and then give you an opportunity to tell me how you think I could improve or what you think I've done well. So, and then we'll also use this example throughout my presentation as we'll like keep returning to it and talk about how we can apply these principles. Okay, so without further ado, this is my example presentation. Okay, generating a DMC graph. Begin with a single node. Repeat until the graph has n nodes. Duplication. Select a node uniformly at random, anchor node. Add a new node. Connect the new node to the anchor node's neighbors. Mutation. Modify each of the anchor node's neighbors independently and with probability q sub n. If a neighbor is modified, remove either the neighbor anchor node edge or the neighbor new node edge. Which edge is removed is decided by a flip of a fair coin. Complementation, connect the new node to the anchor node with probability q sub. Okay, that was my example presentation. Thank you very much. All right, we're not going to do this as a think, pair, share, so you can feel free to just shout out responses. What did I do well? If you can think of anything that I did well, what did I do well?
You're very organized.
Okay, great, very organized. Yeah, Brian.
You made it very easy for people that can't read the presentation to know what the slide says.
Exactly. That is a great point. Don't assume that everyone can see or can hear. So if anyone was blind or could not see very well, then yeah, saying what's on the slides is going to be super helpful. Absolutely. Anything else? What I did well or what I could improve? You will not hurt my feelings. Yeah.
There are too much words and no highlight, and the figure is too small.
Okay, great. There's way too many words. So there's an overwhelming number of words on the screen. There's no color, and the figure is very small. So we could increase the size of the figure to make it easier to see. With regards to color, let's return to that idea in a moment, but I totally am behind you for your other two suggestions. Yeah, Brian.
Just one other thing. as far as what you can improve. I think maybe this is what you're getting at, is that this could be like a bunch of slides and not one.
Absolutely. This doesn't have to be a single slide. We could break this up. This is a lot of content. We can spread it across. As people like to say in like instructional design, you're not paying by the slide. So why not use more? Anything else? Yeah, Abby.
Can you ground us in what a DMC graph is? Like maybe you told us how to make one, but I don't even know what that still is.
Great. Yes. Yeah, there was no contextual information whatsoever, for sure.
I guess my point is just launched in. I was like, wait, what are we doing? And then it says like generating a DMC graph, like in the same font as like everything else. So like the point of what we were doing was a little off.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you pointed out, there's no visual cues to tell us like what is the title versus what is the rest of the content? What is subordinate? What is main points? Absolutely. Yeah.
It was also fairly monotone delivery,
Right.
which didn't kind of just all blurred together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So you already have great intuition about how to improve presentations, how to make them better, what's good, what is not so good. So we're just going to build on that by talking about the research base and these dozen or so principles that have been tested. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through, like I said, a dozen principles. Every time I go through one, I'm going to give you the name. You don't have to memorize the name. It's just for organization purposes. So the first one is this multimedia principle. And it states that people learn better from words and images than from words alone. So I'll state the principle. I'm also going to tell you how many times it was tested. Oops. So this principle has been demonstrated in 13 out of 13 tests. So these are unique tests with unique participants. Again, randomized controlled trials. And in all 13 of them, people who had words and images did better in terms of transfer learning than people who had words alone. And then I'm also going to give you the effect size, and I'm going to present the principles in decreasing order of effect size. So if you can only stay for the first hour, then you'll get the most bang for your buck. What do I mean by effect size if you don't use these a lot? These effect sizes are all standardized mean differences. So take the mean of one group, subtract the mean of the other group, divide by standard deviation. So the effect size is the number of standard deviations between the two means. If that is still unclear, I'm also going to give you a visual representation of what that means. So here we have two standard normal distributions, and their means are 1.35 units apart. So this is a visual representation of that effect size of 1.35. This is obviously not what the real data would look like. This is like, these are true standard normal distributions, so they are very highly idealized. But I just wanted to give you some visual representation of the effect of using words and images versus just words by themselves.
What are the units? The mean of what?
Yeah, so a lot of these tests, these experiments, what they used as an outcome was, for example, I guess I should say that almost all of these were done with STEM, first of all. But so for example, a presentation would be given on how does lightning form? So then the participant in the study watches a presentation or reads a presentation or whatever on how lightning forms. And then what they are asked to do is they are asked questions about, for example, what could you do to make lightning less intense? Or what are some reasons that if you saw clouds in the sky, but no lightning, what might explain that? And then the researchers counted the number of possible answers, like the number of sort of legitimate or reasonable responses that people gave. So what is being tested is sort of how many possible answers you can generate to explain these phenomena or apply what you've learned to new situations. So I understand that that's not necessarily what everyone would want to test, but this is primarily what they used. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So this is actually something that I did well, that I did. I do have both text and an image. And I should say this multimedia principle, it's not just about when it says that you should, people learn better from words and images than from words alone. Words could be either spoken or written. So here I did speak and I also had written words and I have images. So I've actually followed this. I could have made this image bigger for sure. Number two, temporal continuity principle. People learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented simultaneously rather than successively. So this is something that I think people generally do. I don't see people violating this quite so much here at Dana-Farber. This is pretty intuitive. Demonstrated in 8 out of 8 tests, effect size, median effect size of 1.31. And here is how we view that. So I won't spend a lot of time talking about this because it's pretty straightforward. Number three, personalization principle. People learn better when the language is conversational and personal rather than formal and impersonal. So I'll talk about this more in a second and sort of break down what that means and how that was operationalized in these studies. But it's been demonstrated in 13 out of 15 tests with a median effect size of 1. And here's what that looks like. So what does that mean? So for conversational, you want to avoid jargon to the greatest extent that you can. You can't always avoid jargon, but if you can use maybe simpler words, people are more likely to understand what you're saying. Also, don't read your notes verbatim. So that is one thing that I did when I was presenting, is I just read exactly what was on the slides. And I was trying to make an effort to like breathe in the middle of phrases, which is not something that people normally do. So you want to talk as though you are interacting with your audience. And this, I mean, this sounds like it shouldn't make that big of a difference, but it's one of the most, it has one of the largest effect size of all these principles. So talk as though you're talking to another human being is sort of what that means. Also, you want to be personal. So this has a more specific meaning. It's more effective to talk about, for example, your blood cells versus the red blood cells. So as an example, they did this study where they were teaching people about the respiratory system, and it was more effective to say your lungs rather than the lungs. So like I keep saying, you're going to be, when you're presenting, you're going to be in a room with other people. Take advantage of that. Pretend as though you are talking to other human beings and not just reading a text. There is one reason one situation where you should not be using this personalized language, which is when the language is inherently threatening. So, for example, don't say like your death. That's not a good idea. All right. And I think this is going to be easier to apply if you're a physician or a biologist or something. When I was thinking about how to apply this to statistics, which is my discipline, it does become a little bit harder. All right, coherence principle. People learn better when extraneous material is excluded. This has been demonstrated in 18 out of 19 tests with a median effect size of 0.86. And here is what that looks like. This is something that I think, this is the one thing that I think people violate the most since that in what I've seen since starting at Dana-Farber in June. This is, I think, where people could have the biggest impact in changes to their presentations. If you have something on your slide that is not necessary, get rid of it. It is going to be distracting. So this is especially true for images. So let me just show you some examples of what I mean. In my example presentation, I don't know if you noticed, but I had this up and I just never talked about it. This is the same steps that I did talk about, but in reverse order. So this should not be there. It's not helping me at all. So it should be deleted. This is something that I see quite a bit here at Dana-Farber since starting in June, where people will have a single slide that has, minimum 4 different charts on it. You can only talk about one chart at a time. So if you're not talking about something at that moment, don't have it on the slide. I understand that there is a reasonable exception to this, which is if you want to make direct comparisons between, for example, 2 plots, but you can only talk about one at a time. So bring them onto the screen one at a time. Bring one onto the screen, introduce it, explain it to your audience, and then bring the second one on, explain that one, and then make comparisons. But there's really no reason to have all of these charts on the same slide at once. If you only want to talk about plot B, just show plot B, and obviously make it large enough that people can see it. So like I said, I've seen this constantly since starting at Dana-Farber, and I think people could vastly improve their presentations by taking this to heart. Another way that this comes up is with this kind of thing. So this was actually essentially a stock slide that I got from Google Slides. It's a guess about market share over these 4 years. And then there's this image. This image has nothing to do with the numbers. It's not reinforcing the point that's made by the numbers at all. It's just an image for the sake of having an image. So this is going to be distracting. People are going to remember this image more than they're going to remember the actual point you're trying to make with this slide. So just get rid of it. You don't need it. Don't have it on the slide. And this is, related to what we were saying about color. Color can be good. Always keep in mind that some people are colorblind, and so you want to use colorblind friendly palettes. If color isn't doing work for you, if it's not getting your message across, you don't necessarily need it. If it's going to be distracting, you can get rid of it. I should say at this point that I've been using these like only black and white slides. I'm not saying you have to do this. And I'm not saying any ornamentation is bad, but I'm saying you should really think carefully about if something is truly decorative and if you can just get rid of it. So something to think about. All right, spatial contiguity. This one I think is also going to be somewhat intuitive. People learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented near rather than far from each other on the page or screen. Demonstrated in 9 out of 9 tests, median effect size 0.82, and this is what that looks like. So back to my example presentation, I violated this. Note that I talked about an anchor node during my discussion of duplication, but the image for duplication is over here. So that's not great. We can improve it by saying, okay, here's duplication. This is our anchor node. And so further studies on this principle have used eye tracking technology. And what's happening is that when you have something like this, where the text is close to the part of the figure that it's describing, people's eyes are bouncing back and forth between the text and the figure more often. If you have something like this, people are not looking back and forth. They're not connecting, like physically, they're not making those connections between the image and what you're talking about. So you want something like this. Another example, this is not great. Avoid doing this kind of thing. This is going to be better. All right, pre-training. People learn better when they know the names and characteristics of the main concepts. Demonstrated in 10 out of 10 tests, median effect size 0.78, and this is what that looks like. So I want to clarify that this pre-training, this is not what you might know of as like a flipped classroom, where you're saying, okay, in 5 days, we're going to be having a class discussion, so read this text and we'll talk about it, or watch this video and we'll go over it or something. This is within the same like hour of the main presentation. So first, you give people the names and characteristics of the main concepts, and then you go on immediately afterwards into the bulk of the presentation. Not saying that you can't give people like a few days advance notice, but just that's not required. So a way that I could have implemented this, I could have talked a little about graph vocabulary before diving into how to create this graph. I could have also given more contextual information, like I think Abby and Morgan were talking about. But I could have said, okay, here's a node, just to make sure we're on the same page about this vocab. Here is an edge, before diving into my discussion of how to build a DNC graph from this. I'm going through these pretty quickly. Are there any questions before I move on to the next one? Okay. So voice principle, people learn better when the narration in multimedia lessons is spoken in a friendly human voice rather than a machine voice. So this is just further emphasizing the fact that it's better to be conversational rather than to sort of be monotone, as I was doing in my example. So this has been demonstrated in 6 out of 7 tests with a median effect size of 0.74. Here's what that looks like. I don't think I need to dwell on this too much because we've sort of already covered it. All right, redundancy principle. People learn better from graphics and narration than from graphics, narration, and printed text. This has been demonstrated in 5 out of 5 tests. with a median effect size of 0.72. And here's what that looks like. So it's better to have something that people are looking at, like an image that people are looking at, or a video, and then something that they are listening to, than to have both of those things and printed text that they are also looking at. So the idea behind this, there's a whole like cognitive theory of multimedia learning behind this to explain it, but that's too complicated. So I just want to use this example of people like run and listen to music all the time. And generally, I know that there are accidents when this happens, but people do this pretty successfully. So you can listen to something and also look at the world around you, look at images. It's like far harder to read something and also walk, or like read and run. I know that some people do this, but it is harder. I hope you at least admit that. So this is just an analogy to keep this in mind. So this principle, like I said, demonstrated in 5 out of 5 tests. There are some boundary conditions which have been investigated in further testing. So I'll walk you through those. So this effect is diminished if the text is shortened to a few words. So if you do, you're not going to get like arrested if you have text on your slides. It's better to, if you do have text on your slides, to have it be relatively short. It's better when the text is placed next to the part of the graphic being described, like we discussed in the spatial contiguity principle. This effect is diminished when learners are unfamiliar with the words. So if you do have lots of technical jargon, it's totally reasonable to have that on the screen so people can see it. Also, if, for example, you are presenting in English and your audience does not speak English as their first language, then having more text is going to be helpful to them. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. Also, if you have no graphics, like on this very slide, then reasonable to have text on the screen. Oh, and then also if the lesson is slow paced. So if you're trying to get through it quickly, like if you have a 3 to 5 minute presentation or something else that's very short, you're going to want to, you can maximize the impact of your presentation by focusing on having images and then talking over them, rather than having a lot of text on the screen. All right, so how could I have applied that to my example presentation? I didn't necessarily need to have text. I could have said, okay, for this duplication step, what we're going to do is we're going to randomly select one of these 3 nodes. We're going to call this the anchor node. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add a new node, which I've written here as node number 4. And then we're going to connect the new node to all the neighbors of the anchor node, like that. So that's one way to apply this principle. All right, so number 8, redundancy principle. Just kidding. Okay, number 9, generative activity. So people learn better when they are guided in carrying out generative learning activities during learning. And I'll explain in a moment what generative learning activities are. This has a huge research base supporting it. So it's been demonstrated in 37 out of 44 tests just in this lab, is my understanding. And with a median effect size of 0.71, and this is what that looks like. So what are generative learning activities? What does that mean? Essentially, it means people learn better when you get them to actually interact with the material, rather than just like sitting there and watching you present. So here are some examples of generative activities. So these, first I'll go through ones that have been studied by Richard E. Mayer in his lab, and then I'll go through some other ones that have been studied by other groups. So the first thing you can do is you can ask people to summarize in their own words what you're telling them. You can have them draw a concept map of the big ideas of what you're telling them. You can have them draw whatever it is you're telling them. So this is probably going to be better. Well, this would apply in a lot of situations, but if, for example, you're teaching them about the respiratory system or the organelles in a cell, you could have them actually physically draw them. You don't have to have them draw things necessarily. You could have them just imagine them. And going back to the personalization principle, it's going to be better if you have them imagine whatever it is on their own person, at least when that's feasible. You can also do this even if it's not something biological and you're asking them to imagine like your own circulatory system. if you're asking them to imagine something, you can ask them, it's better to ask them to imagine themselves like there in whatever environment it is that you're trying to conjure up. So if you're talking about like convex versus concave functions, getting them to imagine themselves like on the function and what that might mean if you're going to like fall out of it or something would be more helpful than just having them draw it. You can have people engage in self-testing. So not just self-testing, I'll take a brief tangent to talk about this a little bit more. So self-testing in this sense is like, so if you're asking them to, if you're trying to teach them like maximum likelihood estimation or something, asking them to actually like think of a distribution function and then find the MLE, that's a form of self-testing. But also what's great about this is if you ask them to also think, what do I know and what do I not know? So people do better when they engage in this self-assessment of like, what have I actually understood of this and what have I not understood? Self-explain, talk to themselves about how something works, teach someone. So if you have time, you can, in your presentation, have people turn to a neighbor and tell them how something works. This can also be used not with other people. So if you ask people, okay, when you go home, if you have a pet, explain to your pet how this works. Or explain to a stuffed animal how this works. And then enact. So this is what I was talking about earlier with kinesthetic learning. If you get people to actually physically act out what it is, this is especially useful if you have something that is actually physical, like if you're working with a circuit board and you need to like make changes, or if you have something else that will eventually need to be done with your hands. What's kind of interesting about this as well is that I guess this goes back to the personalization principle. If you are demonstrating something with your hands, it's better to do it such that your hands are shown as though they are the audience's hands, rather than as though they are your hands doing the thing. I don't know how that's if that's going to apply to everyone attending this presentation, but cool little fact for you. All right, other things that other groups have studied. So think, pair, share, which I've been using. Small group work, exit tickets. So before people leave, asking them what was the most interesting thing you learned, what was the most surprising thing you learned, what are you still confused about? Thing. Polling, which can be done in Zoom or using other technology. The minute paper, give people a minute to write down everything that they remember. Taxi driver program, that's going to take a minute to explain, so I'll skip over that one. Gallery walk, have people create something, post it around the room, and then have them walk around to look at what their other attendees have done. Okay, so there are lots of options for this. And this kind of thing, like I keep saying, has not just been studied by this particular group at UC Santa Barbara. This is a meta-analysis from 2014 of 158 different experiments using active learning. Again, this is in STEM. But you can see that it has positive effects. This hedges G, it's also a standardized mean difference. So you can interpret these values along the x-axis in the same way that we've been interpreting the effect sizes this entire time. And you can see that these active learning activities are effective across a variety of disciplines. So there is a caveat about this, which is demonstrated in this image, which is from a 2019 paper. So this was, I think, conducted actually at Harvard in the physics department. It was definitely conducted in a physics department. Statics was the topic for a lecture. I don't actually know what that means, but it's a concept in statistics, in physics, rather. Students were randomly assigned to two different groups. So in the passive group, they were sort of lectured at, where the professor did problems on the chalkboard, and then the students wrote them down in their notebooks. In the active group, the students were asked to form groups, small groups, and then work on the problems themselves. So they weren't just watching someone else do something, they were actually engaging in the problem solving themselves. And then the instructor sort of walked around the room, providing help as necessary. So when the students were tested, you can see that the active group outperformed the passive group when it came to what they had learned. But when they were asked questions like, did you enjoy this lecture? They enjoyed the passive lecture. They felt like they learned more from the passive lecture. They felt like the instructor was more effective at teaching, and they wished all their physics courses were taught this way. So this is something that I always end up showing my students when I'm teaching, because they always resist active learning. And I say, you know, I care more about how much you learn than about whether or not you like me. So I'm going to keep using these active learning activities. But important to keep this in mind, going back to these goals that I had listed at the beginning, if your goal is for people to learn something really well, it might be incompatible with some of these other goals. So something to keep in mind. You'll have to set your own priorities for what you're trying to achieve.
Do you think there is that discrepancy?
Yeah, so I think my understanding is that if a professor does problems on the board, they usually do it in a very clear manner. And you can say, oh, this all makes complete sense. I understand this. When you are asked to do this kind of problem yourself, you are sort of you're confronted with the fact that you don't actually understand it as well as you thought you did. So it's important for you to know your own abilities, but it's uncomfortable to be faced with that information as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, there's no more friction with being in a group and being like, you guys figure it out versus just sitting there and like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then they get to the answer and you're like, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of friction. And I should actually, maybe since you've brought up friction, I should say that active learning is not a panacea. So there was another study which I did not bring or include in the slide deck that showed that active learning can also decrease gaps between sort of like underrepresented minority groups and like dominant groups in STEM. But further research has shown that you have to be very mindful about how you are making your small groups. Because if you make groups poorly, then not everyone is going to be able to participate and like get the benefits of the active learning. So yeah, there can be friction in lots of different ways. All right, signaling principle. People learn better when cues are added that show how the material is organized and direct attention to what's relevant at the moment. So there are two aspects to this signaling principle. And I'll demonstrate both of them, but this also has a huge evidence base behind it with a median effect size of 0.7, which looks like this. All right, so what does this mean? So first of all, how the material is organized. So what you should do is first give people an outline. So I'm going to be talking about how to generate a DMC graph. It has these 3 steps. Give people the outline first before you dive into the details of each subpart of the outline. And then later, as you're going through those subparts, include headings that indicate where you are in your outline. So this is definitely something that I think more people could do based on what I've seen here at Dana-Farber. Sometimes it's a little obvious. Like sometimes, you watch a presentation and they're like, okay, first I'm going to introduce things, then I'm going to give the methods, then the results, and then I'm going to conclude. And it's like, wow, groundbreaking. But sometimes it's more helpful than at other times. So anyway, this is how I could have done that. So use these headings. So that is one way, is using this outline first and then headings from the outline. The second way is to give people cues about what to focus on at that moment. So for example, like we're going to select a node uniformly at random and then pointing at that node. So this is what I want you to focus on. And then this will be the anchor node. I violated one of my principles. What did I do wrong? Exactly. I didn't put the words near where they were pointing at the figure, so I should have done this. So another part of signaling, again, drawing people's attention to what you want them to focus on at the moment, is add your lines of text only one at a time. So first, we're going to talk about selecting a node uniformly at random. There's no other text on the screen. I don't want you reading anything else until I start talking about it. And then when you do get to the next thing that you want to talk about, you can gray out the other stuff. So we're going to add a new node. We're going to connect the new node to the anchor node's neighbors. So this is a further way to signal to people, this is what I'm talking about at this moment. I will say this is time consuming. There's an automatic way in, for example, Google Slides and also in Beamer to get lines of text to appear one at a time, but the graying out is not as automatic. So if you have limited time, I get it if you don't want to do that.
You can, as animations in PowerPoint, you can change the transparency of elements. I think that is one way to, yeah.
There you go.
And
Okay.
with an image also, you need to gray out your left side of the screen.
Okay. So thank you. So maybe it is even possible on Google Slides as well then. But anyway, at least for sure for PowerPoint, definitely have an option then. So this is one way of applying signaling. Okay, so I also want to apply it to this. So this is a beef of mine. So I imagine that some of you see this thing all the time. I do not. Before starting at Dana-Farber in June, I had never seen one of these. And so when I started going to presentations here, people would put up something like this for like 60 seconds max and then move on. And I just had so much trouble making sense of this diagram. So I wanted to just give you a sense, if you use these all the time, if you work in clinical trials, and like you can see this and immediately glean the information that it's presenting, I just want to give you a bit of a sense of what I see as someone who is a complete novice. So what I see, if we just look at step 0 and step 1, if I'm just looking at this quickly, you see those both start with R, they both end with TION, and they're the same height. And I know this is a clinical trial, so I imagine there's going to be some randomization somewhere. So if I'm just looking at this quickly, it seems like there's 2 randomization steps, and it's very confusing to me. Again, if you see these all the time, I'm assuming that like once you have a chance to look at these and understand registration is step 0 and it's not randomization, you don't end up making that mistake again. But if you're giving a presentation to novices, important to consider they are not going to have the same familiarity with the images that you're showing. So one way to use signaling to make this a little more intelligible is to say, okay, we are going to first talk about this step, talk about that step. I actually don't even know what these acronyms stand for.
Here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Sweet. Okay, so then talk about standard of care, registration, talk about whatever that entails. Then this, results of our PET, stratification, randomization. So direct people's attention to what you're talking about at the moment so that they can focus on whatever is most important and whatever message you're trying to convey. So that's one way to use signaling. You can also just use your finger. So you can use your finger, obviously. You should keep in mind, you should not use this low tech solution in the way that I did in my example. So you may have noticed that I just pointed generally at the screen. That is not helpful. That is not directing people's attention. So if you are going to be like pointing, you need to specifically point at the part of the image that you are talking about. And that seems common sense, and it totally is. That has also been tested in randomized controlled trials to determine that you do actually need to point at the part of the image that you're describing. So signaling, I think that could have a big impact based on what I've seen. This one I think people could really make good use of.
Sorry, can I just say,
Yeah.
I've seen so many talks where people have a laser pointer and they'll just circle the entire slide. Or the laser pointer will just like wander as they're talking. So then you think you're supposed to be following, but it's just actually random motion. So yeah, it's all very important and be very like conscientious and intentional about how you use it.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing out. That's great.
Talking with their hands in the lasers,
Yeah.
like moving
Yeah,
around.
exactly. Ceiling and flashing drives.
Yeah.
Is it normal for people to write for, like, when I said registration and randomization, is it normal for people to like write vertically like that? Because I feel like I'm very against writing, like, you can put it vertically, but the letters need to be turned so that like, I can't read like that direction.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't have like an experiment to support that, but yeah, I'm not used to reading top to bottom. Generally, in American English, we read left to right. And so that's another way that this is going to be hard to digest for anyone. So I think that might be a good suggestion, what Abby is saying, that you could rotate the letters to make it easier to read.
I always assumed it was to fit it on a page.
Yeah,
But also like, surely you could just change the proportions of all the different rectangles to fit landscape format slide. And like, I mean, look at how much height and, like header and footer there is on the far left box, like.
yeah.
Make it flow down.
Yeah, that is a good point. There are definitely some design changes that could be made to this, absolutely, including, I don't know, maybe someone can, has someone made this and is it like, do you use a program that just automatically does it this way?
I was gonna say, in defense of all the clinical trial people,
Yeah.
we don't make them, they come in like these huge study protocol packets and everyone screenshots and puts them everywhere.
Okay.
So it's like coming top down from people that are in charge of the trial, which is not us typically.
Gotta reach those people. It's like, it's stretched, but look at the aspect.
Yeah,
It's.
yeah,
I'm gonna
absolutely.
now see my background, see how they put it together.
Yeah.
Pick the crafts.
I think this may be a case of this is what we've always done.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being receptive to my beef with this trial schema.
It's in there, that, like, anything, right? Like, there's a lot of like different stuff, like what are the superscripts that like acronyms?
Yeah, that is, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's probably also related to what Morgan was saying, that, this is received and then you screenshot it. And so maybe they were trying to cut out all the text that corresponded to the footnotes. But you're bringing up a good point, which is that it's totally reasonable. I totally understand. People have limited time to create these things. And so it's very common to just use what you have and put it on a slide and be done. That is totally reasonable. You can be more effective if you tailor your images and your plots and all that stuff to the presentation you're giving. It takes more time, and I acknowledge that.
I think for these two, even like covering up everything to the right of step 1, 0, and like walking through, okay, we start here and then you like move along, even makes it better without like changing the image itself.
Yeah. And that's a bit of a spoiler for what's to come, but yes, absolutely, good idea. Were you gonna say something, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to the example that you showed slides ago of like the excerpt from some very dense color explosion.
Yeah.
Like many panels shown on one slide. Even if you were to break that and have one slide per figure panel, what's presented in the paper just may not present well in a presentation style. It just may have too much information to have up for only 30 seconds before you move on.
Yeah, that is a great point. When you are preparing an image for a manuscript, that is that people will receive that and digest it differently from if you're giving a presentation when you only allow them to look at it for a short period of time. So yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so actually, it's 10:54. I was planning on taking about a 5-minute break around this time. So maybe we should do that right now. So like I said, it's 10:54. So say maybe at 11, just to make it a round number. Everybody return here and we'll continue. So welcome back, everyone. So now we're going to talk about segmenting. So people learn better when the material is broken up into segments and the learner has control over the pace. Before I tell you anything else, I want to acknowledge that if you're giving a presentation that is live, it's not feasible to relinquish complete control to the people in your audience. But this is a reminder that it's important for you to, at some points, stop and be like, does anyone have any questions? Did you get that? Can I clarify anything? So I acknowledge that, you're not making videos per se, but we'll talk more about that first part where the material is broken up into segments. Demonstrated in 7 out of 7 tests, median effect size 0.67. All right, so I think Brian pointed this out, that all this text is on one slide. This could be spread out. So what I could have done is broken this up into the 3 steps over 3 slides. And even within a single step, you can do what I was talking about earlier with signaling, which is only have one sub-step appear at a single time. So you want to break stuff up. This is going back to what Morgan was suggesting. If you have something like this, you don't have to show it all at once. You could do this, cover up everything else, and then only make stuff appear as you're talking about it. So you're preventing people from getting distracted by all the other information that's on the slide. I also want to make the point that this just happens naturally when you're using a chalkboard. You can only write one thing on a chalkboard at a time. With PowerPoint slides, you can save time by just showing everything on the slide at once. You don't have to write it all down, but that's not necessarily better for people retaining what you're saying. So I just want to remind people that sometimes low tech solutions serve our purposes and allow us to achieve our objectives better than high tech solutions. More on segmenting. How big should the segments be? So in other words, to what extent should you break down your message? You need to know your audience. Your segments should be bite-sized and easily digestible for the people in your audience. So what's important to keep in mind is that if you are presenting something, you are probably intimately acquainted with it. You probably know it really well. And it's easy to forget that the people in the audience don't know it as well as you do. So you might want to keep that in mind and make the segments smaller than would be easily digestible for you. Having said that, you still do need to, because you are the expert, you know what segments are like meaningfully cohere. So it is important to provide segments that are meaningful because your audience, if they're new to the material, it may not be immediately apparent to them like where the natural breakpoints are. But I do have an example of segmenting and how to break down segments. So everyone can participate in this. This is interactive, minorly interactive. You don't have to get up in front of people. I'm going to display 20 letters from the English alphabet. I'm going to show them for, let's say, 10 seconds. I'll just count to myself. Don't write them down, but I want you to try and remember as many of those 20 letters as you can. And then after I've counted to 10, I'll remove them from the screen and ask you to write down as many as you can remember. Any questions? Okay, here we go. About 10 seconds. Write down as many letters as you can remember. Just out of curiosity, can you raise your hand if you've seen this exercise before? Because it's old. Okay, cool. So did anyone remember all 20 of them? No. Okay.
Not in order.
Not in order. Okay. Yeah, I guess I could show them so you can check their work. Did anyone remember, let's say 10 of them, half of them?
I have 4 out of 5 strings.
Oh, okay. Wow, 4 out of 5 strings. Okay. Did you have any techniques for remembering them?
Making them into things that you could like say out loud kind of easily, or like pretending that it stands for something like BSNB could be Brian Silverstein's new bike.
Wow, good work. Okay, Cool. That is a good technique. I love that. Anyone else who remembered 10 or more, do you have any strategies for remembering them? Yeah.
Repeating them and then adding on and repeating it.
Okay, great, great strategies. I was not anticipating that you would report those strategies, but those are great. So the reason that I asked if you've done this before is because I segmented these 20 letters into these 5 groups, but I didn't have to do it that way. I could have done it this way. And these are more meaningful segments, especially if you're maybe older and you are familiar with broadcast television. So this is a little reminder that the way that you break up material is going to have an impact on how well it's retained by your audience. So you want to choose meaningful segments to be retained. So this was demonstrated, I think, in like the 50s. So this is a very old result in psychology. This is also related to the fact you may have heard that they replicated this in a sort of different way with chess masters. This study is like the go-to study, and it's always talked about in this context, but I'm going to tell you if you don't know it, that if you give chess masters a chessboard with pieces on it, and those pieces could have arisen in those positions in the course of play of a chess game, they can remember it very quickly. But if you put the pieces in random distribution in a way that could not have arisen as the result of a chess game, they are not as able to remember the positions of the chess pieces. So retention is not just a function of like memory capacity, it's also a function of like how you are organizing the material. And then we have from the chat, thank you, Mike. It is also why phone numbers are grouped as they are. Oh, that's interesting. Huh. Yeah, can you say more about that? Do you mind unmuting yourself?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, just why have area code and then the 3-digit prefix and a hyphen in the last 4 digits, because it's easier to remember that than a 7 or 10-digit string of numbers with no breaks in between.
That is a great point. And this is actually, thank you. This is reminding me that in my mom's hometown of Maniwaki, Quebec, there is actually only one, for the entire town, there's one 3-digit prefix in addition to the area code. So growing up, whenever someone was asking what their phone number was, they only gave 4 digits, which I never understood until someone like explained it to me. But yeah, so if you know, oh, this is the area code and this is the prefix, yeah.
I think there's also some psychology evidence about like how many units we can remember in a given chunk, right? It's like, I think it is the number 7 or 3s or 4s or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, actually, so this chunking example, it's from a study, like I said, I think from the 50s, and the name of the study is the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. So yeah, 7 is like the average that people can remember if they just sort of like repeat it to themselves over and over again.
In a similar vein, I know that for counting things manually, counting by 3s is surprisingly easier than like 2s or 5s or whatever.
Wow.
If you're counting like a batch of things. I learned that trick from working in a printing bindery back in high school, where I would have to count things as they came off the machine. And it would be like, little packets or whatever. It would be like 3, 6, 9, 12, yada, yada.
Interesting.
It's easier if you're bundling up to like, say like 50, 60, 70, whatever. Even if it's not like, because by the time you have to break going by multiples of 3, it's like A, sort of a relief, and B, pretty intuitive because it's such small figures. So.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay, so segmenting, break up your message into digestible pieces. I do have another example that's not interactive, which is just to say, imagine explaining the concept of a lime to someone who has never encountered fruit before versus explaining the concept of a lime to someone who knows about lemons. We just say it's like a green lemon. It's way faster than, well, it's sour and it has this thick rind and all that stuff. Okay, so that's segmenting. Oh, this is actually related to what you were just saying, Brian. So this does raise the question of how many bullet points should you have on a given slide? So we are going to do something that is interactive. So this is our first video. So we'll set this up. Many thanks to UCSD, which is where this comes from. Okay. So there's going to be audio. Someone is going to give you instructions. Yeah, so stop.
In a few moments, you'll see some shapes very briefly on screen. Try to keep track of how many shapes you see. Afterwards, the video will pause and an in-video quiz question will allow you to enter your guess. Okay, ready? Here we go in 3, 2, 1. Great, now just indicate in the quiz question that pops up how many shapes you think you saw.
Just shout out how many shapes.
All right, let's show you the answer. Hopefully that one wasn't too tricky. Okay, let's try another set of shapes in 3, 2, 1. Okay, how many did you see this time?
7.
Great, let's slow it down. Okay, let's do one more set in 3, 2, 1. Great, now let us know how many shapes you think you saw. And now for the answer.
Okay. So what was the point of that? I'm assuming that it was harder to count the 7 shapes. So the point of this is that, again, if you're trying to digest information rapidly, it's going to be easier if there are just fewer things that you have to focus on. So like, hopefully I'm assuming the 4 shapes were easier to count than the 7. And then if you can organize your information, like in the final one, there were 9 shapes on the screen, but they were organized into a set of 5 and a set of 4. So I don't know how convincing that is to you, but the advice based on research like this is that try and have no more than 4 bullet points, like major bullet points on your slides. And unless but then you can have more thoughts on the slide if you have like sub bullet points. And so you're organizing your information into like 4 main ideas and then subparts. I don't know if you're convinced by that, but at least it broke up the presentation a little bit. I think that's the last of segmenting. Yeah, any questions about segmenting? Bite-sized chunks, remember that. All right, this is our last principle from this Richard E. Mayer body of evidence. So people learn more when the instructor displays high embodiment rather than low embodiment. And I'll define that in a moment. Demonstrated in 16 out of 17 tests with our lowest effect size, 0.58, which looks like this. So what is embodiment? Make eye contact. This is something where I think people could make improvements on this. Try and make eye contact. Try and maybe if this is hard, set a goal of making eye contact with 1 person in your next presentation, and then in the next one, 2 people. Work up to making eye contact with your audience. Use hand gestures and body movements. So when I did my example presentation, I was making an effort to just stand like this. I don't know how successful I was, but you want to be a person talking to other people, and people are going to learn more if they think they're talking to a human being. So don't be afraid to act like yourself. You don't necessarily need to like get up in people's grill. So like respect people's personal space, but you can, gesture, talk, that kind of thing.
Maybe not too much.
Also, yes. Thank you. Yes, great.
Definitely keep using phrases like,
Am I dating myself? Okay, draw graphics while explaining. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I don't know that it will apply to the people in this room and your presentations. But again, randomized controlled trials have shown that if you are having graphics appear on screen and you're drawing them, it's actually better to have your hand in the image, in the frame, than to just have them sort of appear magically. I don't know the individual effect size for that particular experiment, so maybe it's not that large, but be a person is the bottom line. Okay, so
Can I
those
say
were,
something
yeah,
about
yeah.
that?
yeah.
So using hand gestures and body movements, absolutely. Is there any, do they talk about like wandering from the podium kind of thing? Because I do find that very distracting when the speaker's kind of like all over the room.
Yeah, that is
Where does that fall in that?
that's a great question. Yeah, so that was not directly tested. But I agree. When I was preparing these slides, I did not look that up. I was thinking of that as that might be a style thing, and I didn't want to stomp on anyone's style. But I'm not sure. Is the short answer to the question. Yeah, Audrey.
I guess something else on that end too is like depending on your presentation setup, like sometimes when people do that, they forget that they don't have a mic on.
Yeah.
Right.
And that can be really hard, or like, yeah, if there's like in a larger room, you have like the mic, but then you're like turning to point to your slide and then no one can hear you. Yeah, like those kinds of things.
That is a great point. And you're bringing up really like a larger principle, which I think is just true no matter what. Whenever you're preparing for a presentation, take a moment to put yourself in the shoes of the audience. So like, oh, the audience can only see me if I stand here. And if I like wander all the way over here, people on Zoom are not gonna be able to see me. You can actually just prevent a lot of problems by just taking some time to be like, pretend you're an audience member and think about what are the consequences for that. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Sean?
No, I was just gonna say about the moving. I take the point that it can be distracting, but I also think it depends on, like you were saying, the style of the presenter. Like I find myself moving makes me comfortable.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I almost have to do it in order to feel comfortable.
Yeah. And you're bringing up another great point, which is, you know, these are principles, they are based on evidence, but you need to figure out what works for you. And like, so if you have objections to some of this stuff, like I'm not going to police your behavior. Figure out what works for you and do that. And yeah, you got to be comfortable. Okay, so those are the 12 principles from that particular text. At the risk of overstuffing this presentation, I do have still more information to give you, but before we move on, I want to give you some time to actually put it into practice. So this is a report that was recently released, Developing Competencies for the Future of Data and Computing, the Role of K through 12. I attended a webinar on this last week. And this is the link that you were sent, that Erica sent to you yesterday. I can also put the link in the chat again, just so everyone has it. Okay, just put it in the chat again. So this, like I said, was a webinar. The webinar in its entirety is posted, so it's totally freely available. Anyone can look at it. And then also the slides are freely available for download. So we are going to try and apply these 12 principles to these slides. I'm going to have you, yes, thank you. Have you form small groups if you're in the room. If you're on Zoom, Erica will randomly assign you to breakout rooms. But before you do that, I just want to say, like I said, this is all freely available online, which is why I feel comfortable maybe critiquing it a little. Also, these are recommendations to educators. So I'm just hoping that they will be receptive to other recommendations on their presentation style. Anyway, before moving on, anyone have any trouble accessing this website? Okay, great. So what I'd like you to do is, if you're in the room, form small groups, download the slides, and just choose a slide and discuss how you could maybe improve it using the principles we've talked about, or what are they already doing well. And if you're on Zoom, then Erica will randomly assign you to groups of 3 to 5 people, and you'll do the same thing. All right, so whenever you're ready, go ahead and form your groups and discuss. All right, I think everyone is back from the breakout rooms. Just to drive the point home that we were making earlier about active learning, as soon as I announced the breakout rooms, like 10 people left. So yeah, active learning, difficult to get buy-in for. Okay, is any group willing to share what slide they talked about and maybe what they said about it? Sure, yeah, Brian.
So Sean and I had a good time with this one.
Great.
Then we finally remembered, oh yeah, there's an actual assignment / prompt. But we were looking at slide number 31.
Okay. Oh my God.
Because you can tell that as they approached this deadline, they were really just going for it. I mean, it's great that they managed to fit 3 recommendations on this slide, but I think that this does violate the segmenting principle
Yeah, for sure.
quite a bit. It's really dense, really wordy. Looks a lot more like Word document than slide.
Absolutely. So great. So Brian's bringing up segmenting. We could spread this out, information out across multiple slides. It's really wordy. We could shorten the words and just talk over, like our complete thoughts can appear in what we speak and not necessarily in what is presented on the slide.
Like I kind of think if you're tempted to embolden something in something this wordy, like maybe just make the bold parts be the bullets.
Yeah, that is a great point. So I avoided talking too much about like graphic design, but a graphic design principle is alignment. It's easier to scan something if things are aligned. And so when you have bolding like this, all the beginnings of the bold text are all over the screen. So it's difficult to scan this and figure out what comes first. And yeah, if you are bolding something, maybe that's what you should be including on your slide rather than all the other stuff. Yeah.
When you actually attended this,
Yeah.
was this a wall of text or did they animate any of this?
Good question. When I attended this webinar, there was no animation and it was on Zoom. So there was just a talking head to the right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just kind of sad because this is like the takeaway of the presentation, right? Like how do
Yeah.
the teachers do things differently?
Yeah. That's a good point.
Were they in like an auditorium or just hunched over their laptop?
Hunched over the laptop.
Nice.
Did they do anything well? Well, you said they only have 3 bullet points. So that's good. Could even condense it further, probably.
Those bullet points are under a lot of strain.
They're doing a lot of work. Yes, they are. Great. Okay. Thank you. They could also add an image. I don't know. You'd have to think about what image would be most applicable here, but potentially you could find an image that would convey some of these points or one of these points in an effective way that would be easily memorable. Let's maybe talk about one more slide. We only have half an hour left in the presentation. I want to make sure we cover everything. Any other group want to share a slide they looked at? Yeah, Audrey.
I guess to just like build on. And like first 4 slides all have the same image.
Yeah.
That little girl is the future of computing in K through 12.
Yeah.
But like, is that necessarily relevant to like what this report is? Like, it's kind of like, oh, like token, let's put an image. And not necessarily like helping you like, yeah, like digest what's in the report. And then even though it is a lot of text because it's like almost half the page, it makes it look even more text heavy. And we already saw that lovely photo in the slide above.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have nothing wrong with this child. She's wonderful. We support having her image in this slide deck. But maybe like on the title slide, because on this other slide, this image is not necessarily like related to the message that's being conveyed here. And so it's going to be distracting. And I can tell you my own, when I like sitting watching this webinar, my eyes were just immediately drawn to the image and I wasn't really paying attention to the text. That's just me.
Most of the slides, the same picture. And then if it's not that picture, it's a picture of a building for some reason.
Yeah, this is more.
I think what's really jarring though is that it's like it's successive for each of the images that they chose. So it's kind of just like it's whatever was on the clipboard for several slides in a row.
I was gonna ask you, what do you think they were trying to do?
Well, yeah, I think I think it is good to remind people like why you do this work. I think it's important. This is also has to do with effective communication that like people, you want to be simple and concrete in what you're conveying to people because that's going to stick better. And so you want to remind people like, this is why we are doing this. Like we want what's best for this person. This reminds us of our motivation and our like, if we had to boil down our goals, we want to like leave behind a better world for this person and her peers. So it's very motivating.
Maybe if we're promoting the future of computing, the students shouldn't be using a laptop that still has a VGA in it.
Right?
This is the problem for school.
I think people fall prey to like templates too.
Yeah, oh, for
You know,
sure.
like the PowerPoint template of the slide. Like the
Yeah.
picture with the buildings that looks like a slide that they copied and pasted multiple times.
Actually, if you flip between slides 21 and 22, prepare for a treat.
And opening just sizes, yeah.
Yeah.
They had more text. They
Right.
It makes building smaller.
That reveals that most of the occurrences of that building are, actually, no, wait, everything up before that is. Space.
So, I mean, I'm like you, I'm not graphically inclined, but I think that, what about using images to do segmenting? So like if I was thinking of it for example, with the presentation idea, I was talking about pre-work versus post-work. And thanks to AI, I basically got two images, one where it looks like a bunch of people are filing papers, that was kind of the pre-work thing. And another one where people were doing calculations or accounting, and that was another. But that was to break up those two concepts. Does that make sense to do, or because I totally made that up on my own?
Yeah. So I can answer your question. I unfortunately don't have a lot of like citations that I can provide. So my sense, and maybe someone else knows more about this, is that using a visual sort of language like that can be very helpful. So like Jeremy did this in his cancer bio presentation yesterday, where he consistently used the same image to represent the same thing. And so it was immediately apparent like, oh, he's talking about this. So if you're trying to set up this distinction, that can be helpful. Immediately people know, okay, paperwork, calculations. And so it's easier to like scan an image and know what it is than to read a bunch of text. So I think it can be useful. I don't have like a definitive take on it. Yeah. All right. Okay. So like I said, at the risk of overstuffing this presentation that I'm giving right now, I do have more. So, but I'm hoping the rest will be useful and engaging, but we'll find out. That's an empirical question. Okay, so thank you for participating in that. I do have just a couple tips that I want to give from this text. I'm not going to go through the 8 research-based principles that it says on the cover. I just want to give a few tips that I think would be useful for presentations, not so much for like teaching, because we're not talking about teaching per se. So if you want people to remember what you're telling them, make connections to what they already know. I'm going to talk about this more in a second, but you want to give people cues to activate their memory. If you make connections, there will be more cues pointing to the thing you're trying to convey. Also, when you look at experts' knowledge, it's very densely connected. When you look at novices, they sort of have these like discrete facts that they know, and we want to develop expertise, I guess. Use analogies. That's a way to concretize what you're saying, and again, make connections to what people already know. This is kind of interesting, and your mileage may vary on this one. You want to present the material in the way it will need to be retrieved. So the classic study about this is if you're teaching anatomy and you teach it as in these organs are next to these other organs, these are the locations of these organs, it's going to be difficult for people to answer the question, which organ systems work together when you run a marathon? Because you've provided information in terms of where the organs are located, not in their function or how they interact. So I was trying to think of how this makes sense for the presentations that you're going to be giving. And I think you might have to decide, like, take this example of you have worked on a clinical trial and you are conveying the results. If you're conveying the results maybe to like researchers, you need them to know what you did in the study, or you need to convince them that like there weren't flaws in your study, you need to tell them how the clinical trial was conducted. But if you're talking to physicians and you just want them to use the drug that you now know is effective, you don't necessarily need to go through all of that. Your presentation can be centered around, picture this, you have this patient coming into your office, they are presenting with these symptoms, which drug are you going to reach for? You should reach for this drug. So I don't know, like I said, your mileage may vary for that one, but just something to keep in mind if you want people to be able to easily retrieve the information you're giving them. All right, so I do have a couple comments that are more logistic. So these are the goals that I had brainstormed prior to giving this presentation. I have some comments about how to achieve most of these goals, which is you want to be heard. So use a mic if a mic is available, enunciate, speak toward the microphone of the audience. Don't cover your mouth with your hands. I was trying to demonstrate this when I was doing this kind of thing and just staring at my computer. So do what you can to be heard. Also, like Audrey was saying earlier, if the mic is on the podium, don't wander away from it because then people can't hear you. You want to be seen, don't do something like this. Make sure that the font is large enough for people to read. If you can test your presentation on the equipment you're going to use, I know that's not always possible, but if you can do it, do it. It's in the audience. Can you see what's on the screen? If not, make changes. Also on this, you want to make sure that what you're presenting can be seen. I recommend this highly useful web AIM contrast checker. So that yellow text was difficult to see. Should have tested this. Because you can do, to what extent can you do this? You can get, so what you can do with this contrast checker is you want to compare the foreground to the background of your text and your backgrounds of the slide. You can use this dropper to, yeah, this is wrong. Why did I do this?
I think you can just use the slider if you're trying to pick yellow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I could just use the slider. So I could pick yellow. I did choose yellow as the, okay, so good, yellow. Okay. It's not doing what I want it to.
Oh, and then click the upper right corner where the yellow is, that gradient, I think.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, thank you. So you can use the dropper thing if you set it up correctly, which I did not. But if the foreground, so the text is in yellow and the background is white, the contrast ratio is provided for us here. It's 1.37, and it's telling us that this is not adequate. It's going to fail if the text is normal sized or even if it's large text. And these standards are developed by some authority. I don't know who, but they know what they're talking about. So you want to make sure that the text that you're providing is readable and the contrast makes sense. This is a way to make your presentation accessible to everyone. It needs to be visible. Okay, so changing it to black is going to be a lot better. Oh, there we go. By the way, I will, obviously, if you're in this department, you will have access to these slides because we will put them in the Google Drive. But even if you're not in this department, at the end, I'll show a QR code so you can go to the link and see the slides. So this link, you don't have to memorize or write down Web AIM contrast checker. You can just click on the link when you get the slides. Okay, so that was some logistical stuff. I want to talk now a little bit about how you make what you're saying memorable. So does anyone remember what was going on in the image on the right of the title slide when you walked in?
It's like a text in a frame.
It
Yeah.
was a promotional poster that was instead of actually designing a promotional poster, the guy just screenshotted his conversation that the person was asking him for one.
Exactly. Yeah, so in the image on the right, it was a screenshot of two people having a conversation over text, where one of them was like, hey, can you make a poster for our like music nights? And then he was like, sure, what's all the information? And then the guy texted in the information, and then he just made the screenshot into the poster. So you remember that. Had you seen it before?
No.
All right, what were the names of the bands? Fires, okay.
Or that was the that was the like header thing. That might have been a group chat name.
Okay, I think what we've discovered here is that Brian just has an uncanny memory.
Absolutely true to any of you ever worked with me. It was just a really good image.
Yeah, I think Friars, it was the name of the text, like chain or whatever. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that that image had an inherent story to it, and stories are easier to remember than facts. This is not just me saying this is demonstrated in studies. So, I mean, think of like, can you remember the plot of Good Will Hunting? Can you remember the names of the characters besides Will Hunting? It's easier to remember the story than like individual names or dates, that kind of thing. So you can leverage this in your teaching. So I just want to provide one example of a way that I saw this being done effectively. So if you're in our department and you've been attending the cancer bio sessions, you might remember this image. Max Sellers presented, and he told a story about this place. This is a nuclear plant, and it's in California. And he talks about going to swim here, and the water is like really warm because they like release a lot of heated water that had been used for cooling, I think. And I still remember him telling that story. I can picture it in my head. And the point that he was trying to make with the rest of the slide is that that particular power plant had been shut down, and it was a very slow process to make sure that nothing went wrong. And that contrast with Chernobyl, which, you know, was not intentionally shut down, but shut down in like a very rapid, bad process. And he was making a comparison to, is it apoptosis? Yeah, apoptosis. So I remembered the story. I will admit I had to do some work to try and figure out, okay, what was the point of the story? But the story was the cue that I remembered, and that led me back to the point that he was making. So you can use, if you use stories effectively, they're going to stick better in your audience. Do I have another example? I think I have an example. Okay, I'm going to try this live. I don't know how effective this is going to be, but we're going to find out. Can you raise your hand if you know what interleaving is? Okay, that's one person. Great. Can you raise your hand if you remember the presentation that I gave in June in which I talked about baseball? Okay, well, that's only 2 people now. Double! I have doubled the number of people. 3, okay. Does anyone remember the point? Maybe not Jeremy, but Morgan or Erica, do you remember the point of my baseball story? All right, so not an effective cue. The point of the baseball story, do I have the slides? So in that presentation, I was trying to convey interleaving and why it's an effective learning practice. I could have done that by presenting a systematic review. That might have convinced some people, but I'm sure no one would have remembered. Instead, I talked about this particular study where baseball players were randomly assigned to different batting practices, where some people were given pitches of the same type, like a block of fastballs, a block of curveballs, and a block of changeups, whatever that is, versus other people were randomly assigned to a group where they were given a mix of changeups, fastballs, and curveballs. And that's interleaving, and it led to more effective batting. So that was clearly not as effective as I thought it was going to be. But the point is, at least more people remembered baseball than they did the concept of interleaving. So if you can tell a story, that's going to be more memorable than just like this very abstract concept that you're providing. All right. So that's something I wanted to say about remembering. I do want to talk a little bit about getting people to pay attention. All right. So this is a 5-minute video. We're not going to watch the whole thing. We're going to watch 3 minutes of it. I'm relinquishing 3 minutes of my time to Ira Glass. I think it will be worth it, but you can tell me, obviously. Here we go. Here we go.
I mean, one of the things I think is really important if you're making stories for television or radio is that you understand the building blocks of the stories. And there are different ways to think about this. One of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to think about it the way that you learned in high school, which is in high school, we're all taught that the way that you write is that there's like a topic sentence and then there's like the facts which fill out the argument. In broadcasting, it's completely different. In broadcasting, I think you have 2 basic building blocks, and they're very powerful, and you can use them as you will. And one is the anecdote. And an anecdote is literally just a sequence of actions. If you think of it as just like, what is a story in its purest form? A story in its purest form is somebody saying, this happened, and that led to this next thing, and that led to this next thing, and that led to this next thing, like one thing following another. And some of the things in the sequence can be, and that made me think of this, and then I said this. Like there could be thoughts and ideas as part of it, but like one is leading to the next, leading to the next. And the power of the anecdote is so great that no matter how, in a way, like no matter how boring the material is, if it's in a story form where there's an anecdote happening, and then he said this to me, and then I went here, and then I came downstairs, and I thought, like, what the hell? Like, it has a momentum in and of itself that no matter how boring the facts are, like I'm trying to think like okay, there's, you know, if you try to think like the most boring possible story, okay, there's a guy and he wakes up and he's lying there in bed and the house is very, very quiet, just unearthly quiet. And so he sits up and he puts his feet on the floor and he walks to the door of his bedroom and again, just very, very quiet. Walks down the stairs, looks around, just unusually quiet. Now, like this is like what I'm telling you is the most boring possible fact pattern, and yet there's suspense in it. It feels like something's going to happen. And the reason why is because literally it's a sequence of events. Like this guy is doing this thing, he's moving from space to space. You can feel through its form that when you have one thing leading to the next, leading to the next, you can feel inherently that you're on a train that has a destination and that he's going to find something. And so one of the most powerful things you have to figure out is, like, do you just start with the action, or should you just start with the action? In general, you want to start with the action, or you often do. So that's one of your building blocks. The other thing that little anecdote has is that it's raising a question from the beginning. And that's the other thing that you want, is you want bait. You want to constantly be raising questions. And so in that little story, the bait is that the house is very quiet. And so the question hanging in the air is why? And it's implied that any question you raise, you're going to answer. And so again, that's another thing you want to manipulate. You want to be constantly raising questions and answering them from the beginning of the story. And that the whole shape of a story is that you're throwing out questions to keep people watching or listening and then answering them along the way.
So I think this is something we can implement in science. Generally, we're trying to answer questions in science. And if we're conducting a study or implementing a new method, it's to answer a question. But something to think about as you are presenting. I do want to give just one final example of how I've seen this used effectively. So this is the last thing that I'll present. So when I was a Peace Corps volunteer from 2010 to 2012, and sometime in that period, I attended this talk by this wonderful woman named Vanessa Dickey, who still works for the Peace Corps. And it was a talk on behavior change. So this was over 14 years ago. And I still remember the talk. She started by telling this story. So what she said was, this was in Senegal at the time, but she was talking about how she had spent time in Jakarta. And she was working on this program to try and improve maternal child health outcomes. And apparently there's research that as soon as a baby is born, it's best to get skin to skin contact between the baby and the parent is like immediately. And so they were trying to get this to happen. Like I said, this was a talk on behavior change. So they recruited all these pregnant women, and they had this like very long process of like trying to get buy-in for getting the skin to skin contact right at birth. And the women were like totally jazzed about it. They were behind it. They understood the importance. They were totally committed that when they gave birth, they were going to do this skin to skin contact thing. And so Vanessa was like super jazzed about this. She was like, we're going to get such good results from this project. And then the women gave birth and just none of them did it. And she was like, why? How did this happen? They were so committed. Why didn't they do this skin to skin contact thing? So she said that at the beginning of her 45-minute presentation and then didn't finish the story until the end. So for the rest of the presentation, everyone in the audience was like, what happened? Like, tell us. This is this is a way to get people engaged. The psychologist Robert Cialdini has employed this. I think this is called in like psychology jargon knowledge gap. Like you don't just start, as Ira Glass was saying, by like telling people stuff. You start with what is the mystery? And so I still remember her telling that story. I still remember what she said. It was a talk on behavior change. She said that people will change their behavior. They will adopt a new behavior if it's easy, if it's fun, and if their friends are doing it. So it has to be easy. It can't be something super onerous. It needs to be something that is like inherently enjoyable, or ideally should be. And then people are social creatures. So if their friends are doing it, they will also employ this new thing. I still remember that. And then it was only at the end that she said, the reason that these moms were not doing this is because they didn't have the power in the birthing room. As soon as they gave birth, it was the doctors and the nurses who took the baby away. And like, they didn't have the power to say, no, 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 you do this. This is what I want. Because there was such a power imbalance in that setting. Still remember. So yeah, just some ideas, ways you can get people engaged and also remember what you're trying to tell them. All right, so that was the last thing. This is the QR code for these slides. I guess the very last thing that I'll say is, if anyone at DFCI or current or former students wants me to look at a presentation and give them feedback, I'd be totally happy to do that. Just reach out. But otherwise, thank you all for coming. Any questions if you have any questions? It's cool if you don't as well.
I feel like question I have is we're going back to like the accessibility of slides,
yeah.
And using colors and things like that. So like a lot of people just have white slides, black text, and they'll put their images. And that's easy and everybody can read it and it's accessible. And then some people like to have these really stylized PowerPoint presentations. Do you feel like those kind of, or like a dark background with light text? Is there research behind which is better? Or is it just personal preference? Or
that is a good question. I'm sure that it's a spectrum, and to the like certain stuff can be more distracting versus less distracting. For the question about white on black, we can actually just do that right now. So if I just choose as the foreground this white color.
I'm pretty sure it's like the highest contrast you can get, right? It's like
Right.
pure black.
So yeah, white on black, not an issue. Very high contrast ratio. But yeah, I wish I had better advice in terms of like the other part of the question.
The question I do.
Yeah. We can check. So this says 19.27. There's going to be a little bit of error because I'm doing this just by hand, but
Use the hex codes and just switching it up.
oh yeah,
so white is kind of like that 6 Fs.
6
And
Fs.
black is 6 zeros. It's the other way.
I think it's the
Really
same.
different
I
colors.
like the other one wasn't pure black.
Yeah.
Switching again.
I've seen some presentations where people are showing these really pretty, like microscope type images. And those may have a black background. And so then they set their theme for their whole presentation as like white text on black. And that way, if you're in a really dark room, you don't suddenly like jar the audience by like having it be really dark with
Right.
suddenly a really like white slide. It's like it
Keeping
hurts your
it-
eyes a little bit. So it just kind of like keeps everything in that dark theme, and that is helpful. But about the other colors, I feel like there should be color to provide color in the other sense of that word, but it should carry a meaning to it, like not just like colors used at random. So like if you have an image that has color and your text is complementing that image, you can use the same color to depict the same piece of that story. And you kind of tie those themes together.
Other comments, questions? Okay, thank you for coming. See you next time.